Hello everyone, I am so excited to have you here today for a demo on creating patterns with a seamless repeat on paper. This is a really great process to work with because it can work in any situation with low technology. You don't need a computer, all you need are these very basic materials. You can see I have tape, an X-Acto knife, something to draw with. I have a pencil and pen here. Later on, I'll also use a crayon for color, but I just have simple paper, a straight edge, a ruler would be good so that we can ensure that things are square, something to cut on, and those materials can get us a really fantastic seamless repeat. So what I start to do first here is I am going to be working with a square piece of paper. So I'm just ensuring that all sides of my paper are equal, and I'm going to do these measurements pretty carefully. I don't want angles cut into my paper at all, so I'm measuring everything. I don't want a rhombus. I want a perfectly square piece of paper. You could also do this with a rectangle, but just ensuring that the angles, the edges of your paper are square really helps. And now that I have my square canvas, I am ready to move on to the next stage. So at this point in my process, I've decided to skip the pencil. If you're drawing something that needs to be more accurate, you can always use pencil and pen together. But for me, it's just going to be quicker for this demo for me to just get in there. My subject is going to be houseplants. And the nice thing about drawing houseplants or plants in general is that they are organic shapes. They're a little more forgiving than some other subjects. So I'm going in here with a fairly wide liner pen, and I'm just going to be kind of drawing many houseplants to fill up my design. Now, one thing that's highly important for this process is that we do not touch the outer edges of our page. So think of there being a little invisible fence around the outer edges of our page. We don't want pieces of our design at this point in the process to touch those edges. So you see I'm trying to fill in the space, but I'm not allowing those leaves to touch that outer edge. This helps us create a truly seamless repeat in the end. So one thing I've decided to do in this demo that you may or may not want to do is to add color as we're building our repeat. So for me, I'm coloring in the negative space of my design with just a regular crayon, very fancy materials. But if you do decide to add color at this point, just remember that rule. We are not going to allow any marks, drawing or color, to touch those very edges of our paper. So at this point in my design, I have decided I'm ready to cut. Now, if you'll notice, my design does not get super close to the edges. That will cause there to be a little bit of a gap in my pattern. So it's not plants everywhere, but it's plants in kind of groupings and space between. So what I'm going to do is mark exactly the halfway point on my paper. I'll mark that on the top and bottom. And then what we're going to do is cut clean through our drawing, which can feel sort of counterintuitive. But if you take a moment to think about it, it is that cut straight through our paper that allows the seamless repeat to occur. So when I slice through, I'm making the inside edges of this design into the outside edges. So ensuring that I'm cutting straight through in the exact middle of my design is going to help. And now what I'm about to do is swap the right piece to the left and the left to the right. And this will make the inside edges of my piece now the outside edges. So once you've done that, make sure you're aligning it pretty well. And then you're just going to flip it over and tape it together in that orientation. So now that I've taped together my design on the back side of the composition, I'm going to do the same process, splitting the paper in the opposite direction. So last time I split it straight up and down, and now I'm going to split it through the middle, kind of horizontally. So again, I'm using my ruler. I'm making sure I'm cutting it exactly at the same measurement straight through the middle. And measuring correctly really ensures that you're not going to get a weird angle on your cut, which will complicate the actual seamless repeat of the pattern. So I would recommend taking time at this stage and just being sure you're careful with your cuts. So once those marks are made, again, the scary part is going to be slicing through your composition straight through the middle. Always make sure your X-Acto blades are sharp. This is a box cutter, but it's new, so I know it's going to make a good cut. And then we'll do the same exact thing. The top becomes the bottom becomes the top, and I will flip over my composition in that orientation and tape it together, being sure that I'm as perfect as possible. So after that process is complete, you are left with some blank areas around the old outer edges of your page. Now, for me, I left quite a bit of space between my design and the outer edge. It might be easier if you guys get closer to that outer edge, but for me, I wanted a little bit of a gap in the plant design. But what my job is now is to fill in over the old edges that we taped together. But I'm still going to be very careful not to touch the new outer edges of my design. So as I fill in, I am careful not to hit those edges, but still thinking about the overall flow. How do I want this pattern to look? Filling in more color. So you can see here that I have gotten pretty close to the edges with my color. For my purposes, I'm going to take apart my pattern and kind of put it back on the opposite side so that I can have those color strokes connect. If you did not color your background in this way, you wouldn't have to do this step. You'd already have a seamless repeat. But for me, I want those little scratches of crayon to kind of match up across those edges. So I'm going to kind of swap it over, fill in those last little bits of color, and then hopefully have a final seamless repeat. So after addressing the colored edges, I taped my composition back together. You can see here my studio assistant. But I'm pretty happy with the color, the line work, and I feel like since I followed the instructions, this should be repeating well. So one way to test your repeat that also involves paper is to photocopy your new design, trim, and then align the copies to see how your repeat works. So I'm going to align these. Hopefully we see that pattern flow through. And you could like do wallpaper with this, but this is just a fun way to see how your pattern flows. So you can see those little gaps in between, you can see the clusters of plants, and hopefully all my lines kind of pull through perfectly. For those of you that have access to Photoshop, there are many more options. So for example, on my design, I've scanned it in. I've adjusted the color so that the green is a little bit less harsh and I can see my line work more. And I can also zoom out and see the pattern repeat many, many more times. We will be talking about Photoshop in the future. You'll see how easy it is to create repeating patterns there. But for now, I'm excited to see what you guys do with the basics. What is the subject of your pattern? How did you draw it? How did the repeat come out? So I would love to see what you've been working on. Get to work with paper and feel free to email me photographs of what you created. Good luck!